Welcome to the Internet Echo Chamber podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which, if you don't know, is the bill that severely restricts the right to protest in the UK. I'm going to do a short 5 or 6 minute separate episode briefly explaining it, which you might want to watch first before watching this one. But yeah, it's a really interesting episode, and hearing how proper activists and people who go on protests a lot, of how they feel about it, is really shocking, because it shows how important protest is as far as securing democracy, and it's really scary that it's being infringed on by Parliament so much, or the government. But yeah, without further ado, let's go right into the episode.
We're being joined by Ethan, Tommy, Finley, Edmund, and also Tom. If anyone wants to make noises to indicate who you are, then you can go ahead right now. You only got a few seconds though.
I made a very brief noise to indicate that, but it was too quiet. So hello, it's me, Ethan.
Hello, I am Tom.
Hi, I'm Finley.
I'm a student at the University of Manchester.
Hello.
So, I mean, everyone's getting spooked about the bill because of like extra powers and stuff. But then, if you like take a step back and then think about the fact that like the police have a lot of powers already, and like all of the shit with the vigil and stuff happened pre-bill, so an enlargement of the powers is only going to be a scarier version of that. So, what are people's thoughts on the general situation with the police as far as protests, but also just their general exercising of their powers in day-to-day life kind of thing?
Question, what's the vigil? I'm stupid and don't know.
I mean, we'll get that.
I think that they're definitely enjoying their powers they've been given because of this crisis situation, which has basically, promoted the idea of authoritarianism and actually made that almost a necessity when it's framed as something that is this sort of crisis point. And I think it's sort of been used by the state, the politicians, the policing system. But I think in a way it's sort of like that the legal framework has now made it so that is their job to go around and sort of like break up any large gatherings, because it's actually made that sort of situation illegal for people to actually get together in the same place. They're more than welcome to do it online, in a video call over some proprietary software, but to actually meet up in person, that's now
a step too far.
Exactly. I mean, there was a protest yesterday, wasn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, what was the police presence like there?
It was pretty heavy, to be fair. They had so many fucking police. Like, they were, they had the thing where they, like, scan people for their faces, like facial recognition. So I was there. I'm quite recognisable. Like, I'm 6'6". Like, people can pick me out of a crowd. And I had my hood up all over my face, mask on like that, and my flatmate looked me dead in the face and didn't recognise me. So like I was quite impressed with myself on that regard. But they were really fucking heavy-handed, especially.
They were wearing body cams as well. I guess
they were wearing them when they wanted to, but then when they assaulted that teenager for shaking his head at a police van, they obviously had them off for that.
Well, no, they act like bouncers. When bouncers do the same thing, they go and go and mess up somebody, like turn off their camera or delete the footage. And it's the same sort of brutality, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
In a way. But why are they behaving like that? Why are they? And especially when you look at it in the context of this horrible thing. I don't want to skip ahead if we're going to talk about this thing later, but with Sarah vigil and everything, it's just crazy. So how that's the situation we're in now, where this is what's happening in this country, in the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like trying to get to the why somebody would be in that state to do that, or why police officers, I guess, are encroaching on.
I think it's a weird one, isn't it? Because you hear all this stuff when people are like, oh, ACAB, and then you get some 14-year-old infographic Instagram liberal that's like, oh no, it just means the system. Like, they're not all bad people. But I think when you're doing that sort of stuff, you're clearly a cunt. Like, I hate to, sorry if I'm not allowed to use that sort of language. But like, if you're doing that sort of stuff, it's not because you're in a bad system. That probably doesn't help. but it does just mean you are an awful person. I genuinely, I know it's like quite an inflammatory thing to say, but if you're behaving like that, you are just a wanker.
I mean, if you're saying, like, oh, they're not, like, all bad, the whole point is that, like, it doesn't matter if they're all bad, the system and the people who are there. There is more than enough of them in the system that it doesn't matter if there's a couple good people and, like, a couple bad people. The fact that it allows bad people is the problem. And, like, saying that, oh, they're not all bad, you're completely missing the point.
Yeah, that's the thing. People are like, if you're genuinely a good cop, quit your job. If any police officers are listening to this podcast right now, quit your job or you are an asshole. That's what I'm.
Hold on, should we say that's not a bad one, then we only have good cops left? Otherwise, that just sounds like, oh yeah, we don't want any good policemen anymore.
How about more accountability for police officers and
that sounds good.
training? And actually more screening to make sure they're not psychopaths and won't abuse their powers and actually will uphold the law in a fair way.
I think it's more just it's the monopoly on violence.
Well, most of them are, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? Like, how do you know?
Yeah.
Is it the individual or is it the system that they're part of? It's driving that.
Yeah.
You know, just disgusting behaviour.
Feels like one of those things where both are influencers and they both like make each other worse. Like there's a couple like insane people, and then they're in a shitty establishment that makes them even more shitty, and it just keeps on bouncing off of each other.
Yeah, without the people doing bad things, there'd be no problem in the system. But the fact that the system allows and potentially abets that because of bad people who can do that when they're in such a position to allow it to happen, then it becomes like a problem of both mixing and being like a self-fulfilling sort of like feedback loop. Because if it was like a couple bad people who are higher ups or whatever, or a couple bad people who don't report people for doing other bad people for doing bad things, that means that they stay for longer, which gives them more chance of getting promoted, which gives them more chance of hiring other people so they can look the other way, and that's when you get a lot of people in the police force who end up having really similar opinions towards people, and usually pretty negative ones, hence why people are annoyed at police.
To be fair, yes. Yeah. It's true. I mean, all of this is about like what the limits are and whether they're exceeding limits and stuff. That's the whole like vigil situation, and I don't know what the consensus was on what they were exceeding and whether they did, but just as far as general situations, not specific to COVID, because we'll talk about COVID protests a little bit later. I don't know if anyone has any opinions just as far as protests, as far as like obviously like riots and stuff that is on the other end of the spectrum compared to a peaceful protest where people are just vibing. Can anyone think of a place, a dividing line or a couple circumstances that indicate where police should intervene as far as when it gets too disruptive, just
like,
as far as
right now
morals and
or in
stuff?
general terms of like society?
Like
specific...
not considering COVID.
Not considering
like,
COVID, okay.
Yeah.
Fuck, man, I don't know. Like, I think I kind of err on the more extreme side, where like with the amount of peaceful protests that have been done on so many things throughout like such a long period of time, nothing ever seems to come about from them. It's only ever when something more extreme happens that's then condemned in the time. But that's the only thing that, to me, seems to stir any decent amount of change in a feasible amount of time that isn't like 200 years or something stupid like that. So like,
Completely agree.
mine would be more on the extreme side, so I don't really know where like the line would be drawn. I guess any harm that's done unnecessarily to people who aren't like to do it. So like, if you've got a peaceful protest that like I don't know turns into a riot or something, and then people are just basically bodying anyone and everyone they see, that's just a bit of a problem.
Yes.
I think.
How does it reach that point? Is it just really the number of people that are there, and then the more people there are, like the less individual accountability people feel towards their actions, they feel like they're part of a group?
I think 99 times out of 100, those things only happen when the police get involved. Like when you look at like the London riots, for example, in 2011, that started off as a peaceful vigil for Mark Duggan outside Tottenham police station. It only got violent because the police then criminalised all of those people that were peacefully protesting, and that's why this bill is shit. Because this will essentially, by making peaceful protest illegal, in for lack of a better sense of the word, by making peaceful protests illegal, all that they are going to do is you'll go to a peaceful protest, the police will nick 6 or 7 people, people get pissed off about it because suddenly the police are nicking people, and then it turns into a riot. And who can blame them? Because you've gone out because you care about a cause and you're peacefully protesting. Your mate's just got battered by a police officer. You're going to be pissed off about it, and then it's going to lead to a riot, and then it's
So you're saying they instigate it, they fuel the fire.
There is the whole
police-
argument of you're already being treated like a criminal, so you may
Yeah.
as well commit crime. If it's
Yeah.
a crime to stand around, you may as
It's
well
a
do something more
self-perpetuating
proactive.
cycle, that's what you're saying.
Completely. And like
Yeah.
that's the thing as well with all of
Sows
these.
the seeds of mistrust between like the protesters and the police and sort of the
Like when
stuff
you
like that
and when
together.
you look at this bill as well, like if you're gonna get like say
But is it, I mean,
what
it's almost like what China does, you know, the CCP.
you can get if you get 10 years for like being like protesting outside a bank, but you'll also get 10 years if you smash all of the windows of that bank and like burn it out. Like why would you if you care that much and they're going to criminalize you anyway, people are just going to do more extreme shit. Like and like again, I'm not saying that that's a good or a bad thing. I think that if people are protesting about something, they've normally got a point unless they're like right-wing vaccine hoaxers and shit. But like, if you're gonna get 10 years for spray painting something on Winston Churchill, you're gonna be more likely to pull it down, aren't you? Like,
Yeah. Already
It's,
fucked, so...
it's a
Would,
delicate-
would,
a
would,
delicate
would that be
balance.
like, would they be given the same sentence in a court of law though, like in reality, if they were just peacefully protesting compared to if they
I mean,
were
that's the
smashing
thing.
up and
Almost
vandalising?
certainly not, but in the moment.
But it's just the idea that they could be, the idea
Yeah.
legally,
But like, also in the moment, you know, emotions are high, and if you're like seeing, I'm going to get arrested anyways, you're not going to be thinking in that moment when people around you who agree with you are all getting arrested for seemingly no reason. You're not going to think, if I comply right now, I'll only get like 3 years, or I'll only have X sentence. You'll be like, I'm here to do like something to do with a message, or make a point, or whatever. And you're going to do whatever gets that across. And if you're already incriminated, you're going to be like, well, I'm going to do the best I can to get this across. And usually that, like, you know, you'll like feel like a bit of a martyr or whatever. You know, you got to go out with a bang, that sort of thing. If you're going to be arrested anyways, then you may as well make more of a statement when you can.
Yeah.
That's how some people might think. Obviously, not everyone thinks like that. Some people might just be like, ah, shit, time to dip, which would probably be me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like there's this huge 307-page bill, and it's like one word is the whole thing that determines your sentence as far as like whether it's significant impact or not that, and you can't expect people in those circumstances to make judgments when the situation is so emotional and aggravated and stuff. So
because also when you've got that level of like subjectivity, like is it significant or not? We've seen how the police behaved last summer with regards to Black Lives Matter. Are we going to think that they're going to be proportionate and equal in the way that they distribute whether something is significant? Of course they're not going to. They're going to be as racist as they already are, as sexist as they already are, as transphobic as they already are, as class, like all of the biases that the police already exude are just going to be weaponized further through that subjectivity of significant. It's shit.
Yeah, it feels like increasing the amount of power in a system that's already been pre-established to have a lot of problems and prejudices. It feels like that's just going to be like increasing the divide between that, because people are already unhappy with the police force and like individuals within it and how they act. So just basically giving them more power to essentially just disagree with people and punish them for disagreeing with them, since there's already a divide, that's just going to make that a lot worse, because it doesn't seem like that's really answering any of the problems that have been repeatedly established to be within the police force. I'm sure everyone knows about that study of that reporter that basically went through the police academy ages ago and found all of this horrible stuff about their views towards, I think it was like specifically Asian immigrants at the time that it was done, and then that was like released as part of a big study. Showed, yeah, no, there's a fuck ton of problems in it.
yeah.
Cannot remember the name of the dude who did it or study, because I am a brainlet, but it's ridiculously popular.
Oh, well, that's fair enough.
And specifically British, which helps quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of, I mean, yeah. It's hard to like. That's the whole thing about this bill is that it's basing a huge thing about one single word that's interpreted is inevitably going to be like tested by the police, as in like, oh, can we push people over when they do this? Does this count as justification, kind of thing? And yeah, it's just too uncertain. We need some certainty about.
I wanted to say
Protesters
to
as
anyone
well.
who's actually been, at a peaceful protest, how would they describe the feeling, the atmosphere there? Obviously, before there's any sort of violence or rioting or sort of, conflict with the police or anything like that. How would they describe that? And if that's actually a positive way of, inducing a change that obviously you see something that's wrong with the world, and you have a lot of people that agree with you, and obviously that's how that movement starts. So is this just a way of sort of counteracting that?
Yeah.
Actual, punishing questioning, I guess, of the narrative or the agenda that is commonly agreed outside of that protest.
Yeah. I mean, like, the flip side, like, nice idea would be, like, the police's role is to, like, calm everything down in, like, an actual productive, constructive way that stops violence, which a lot of people agree is a step too far kind of thing. But then, obviously, the question then becomes, at what point does that kind of thing happen? As in, like, so like one person protesting in the middle of a town square, obviously not. But then when roadblocks and things happen, and roadblocks were mentioned by inference in the bill as far as something that's a bit further along that spectrum, and like the 2019 Extinction Rebellion protests when people were on trains and stuff. I don't know if people think that that's past a certain point where it's necessary and proportionate to send a message, kind of thing.
I don't think it's necessary for the police to get involved. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I think XR have done some fantastic. I'm not particularly affiliated with XR. I don't tend to go to them. I thought the train thing, personally, was fucking stupid. It just stopped normal people going to their job. That was just poor tactics. But like, I don't think that it should be the police's role to like determine something that's not actually hurting anyone. Like, I've blocked roads. We've all done that sort of thing, and it's not that deep. Like, someone at the protest yesterday, someone did try and run loads of people over, and like, yeah, that's not safe. But then it was dealt with by the crowd because I think someone kicked his wing mirror in. So like, at the end of the day, I don't think it should be the police that are stepping in, because the police have never de-escalated anything with regards to a protest. They don't do that sort of thing. Even if you look at what happened with all the fascists in Hyde Park yesterday, the police only escalated things because they were just really like aggressive. And don't get me wrong, I don't agree with anything that they were protesting about. But when you look at it objectively with regards to police strategy, it doesn't fucking work to de-escalate things. They don't de-escalate things, because as soon as you go to a peaceful protest, you feel safe, you feel happy, you're supported, you're in solidarity with everyone there. The police turn up. Don't know about you guys, I shit myself a little bit, because I'm like, oh, well, now I've got to consider the fact of like, how far am I willing to like go with this? Like, what if they kettle us? Like, it could go so wrong as soon as the police get there that it's never going to de-escalate.
Yeah.
True. Also, as a counterpoint to the whole blocking the road isn't that big of a deal, there's always like, you could spin up 1,000 stories of how it is a big deal, and like, blocking road or trains, like, oh, one person on a train who's like on their way to their first job interview in years and they're homeless, like this is their like a main chance of going back into getting back on their feet or on the road, and it's like suddenly they're like having an accident, and if the road wasn't blocked then maybe they would be fine and all that stuff. So it's like, I understand like completely, like, to make a message you have to do something that's like publicly disruptive, and all the time you can say, this how you're feeling right now is how we feel all the time because of X, or how we will feel if X bill is passed or whatever. So like, I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen, but anything that disrupts like the public is going to affect the public no matter how small it is. And like, So I can understand why they don't want any of that, but there's not really many other ways that are effective at sending a message other than just like standing still with a sign and being easily ignored because you're not really doing anything other than wasting your time in the middle of town, just milling
And also,
about.
like, sorry, go on.
Oh, I'm done. You
Oh,
go.
no, I was gonna say, and also like, no one's a dickhead. Like, if you hear an ambulance coming and you're blocking the road, you're obviously gonna get out of the way. Like,
Yeah.
that is obscene that anyone would not do that. And like the example of like a job interview, for example. Right, say I'm going to a job interview and then someone has blocked the road. I then get there, go to the guy that had the interview, and I go, I'm really sorry. And regardless of how I feel about the protest, I can just be like, some dickheads block the road for some protest. And the boss will probably grumble about it as well. And then we just get like, there's such bigger problems in the world, such as climate emergency, such as racism, that I think someone's job interview, I think that can be quite easily, put aside for a minute. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm just saying that there's always a counterpoint that can be made, and right now that's the only thing that I can think of is that like it will still affect individuals.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky, like, just as far as the Extinction Rebellion perspective, there's like a few principles and that they follow as far as conducting themselves. And there aren't super many, so that there's a lot of different things that can be done, but there's a consensus that non-violence is like a huge part of it. So that's just one example of one group that thinks that violent protests are bad, and obviously like certain Black Lives Matter protests last year became violent, and protest is needed, but then I don't know if we can think of, because like if violent protests are happening as well as peaceful ones, they typically get lumped in together as protests are doing all of this kind of thing, which kind of means that it would feel like a benefit if we could categorize certain ones as being too far, with like a lot of room for looking at the situation. But
That can't be done because the moment that there's two people who support the same message and one group, even if it's like a splinter group that's supported the same core message but has different beliefs on it, it doesn't matter like how different they are. People are still going to lump them together because it's just like both easier, and also if you disagree with them, you're going to look at the worst that people do subconsciously and be like, yeah, no, they've done this, that's bad. And like, it doesn't matter if it's like 95% peaceful, 1% or no, 5% violent. Like, people are going to look at that and be like, the whole group is now condemned because they've done violent things. It doesn't matter if they're different groups supporting the same or similar messages. That's just how people work. Like, there's no way categorizing it officially, like legally, that might be cool, but it won't change like public opinion on it. And I think because it's like a public issue, public opinion is one of the more important things. But obviously, legally is the be all end all. You have to change the laws if you want change to happen. But like concerning public opinion, there's no way that you can categorize it because people just do that anyways. Like they're going to mentally categorize it themselves, and you can't really control that. At least that's what I think.
Well, I
I
think
hate
like
to say
the
it.
oh sorry.
Oh
I
no, go
was
on.
I was going to jump in and say like I think the problem is it's a bit of like it's a terrible choice if you're a protester to like if you just protest peacefully then you might not get any media coverage and it's really hard to get noticed. But if you don't, then like the moderate media is just going to have a field day putting all over the front cover of their press that there's a violent protest, and you're going to lose public sympathy. So I think it is just a really difficult decision from that point of view.
I hate to say it. I think it was Tommy speaking there. I actually can't see who's speaking at each point, so I'm really quite lost in all of it. But I kind of.
And I'm Ethan.
Oh, okay, Ethan, my bad. Yeah, I think I disagree with you there. I mean, I have comrades that were in like the 6-hour kettles at Black Lives Matter in London and stuff like that, and they only ended up becoming violent because when you put people in a 6-hour kettle, they're going to get a bit ratty about it, and to sit and go, we need to be completely non-violent. I mean, for example, I know people that were on the HS2 camps, which, by the way, are completely criminalised by this bill, and I think that they are some of the strongest anti-capitalist environmental fighters in this country. They are absolutely fantastic, and their method of protest is completely outlawed by this bill, which is fucking abhorrent. But when you look at the people on those camps, the violence always comes from the state, as in the bailiffs, as in from the police. Like, and their tactics that they use are specifically designed to rile people up who were previously peaceful. You say you've got these like two groups of like people that are violent protesters and peaceful protesters, but every violent protester goes hoping it's peaceful. Like it's very, I don't know of anyone on the left, at least. I think you do tend to have a bit of a tendency of like far right agitators, but on the left specifically, I don't know anyone that goes and they go to a big protest or like a demo and go, I'm here to kick some ass here. Like, I don't think that really happens. I think it only happens when people get agitated, whether that be from counter demonstrations or from the state. I think it comes from the top. It doesn't come from two different groups, and therefore I think for us to go, oh, violent protest delegitimizes peaceful protest, I don't think we can really make that sort of distinction. And also, who's criticizing it? Pretty fucking Patel. I don't give a shit what she thinks. I'm sorry. She doesn't agree with protest as a concept. So for her to go, oh, the violent BLM demonstrations, of course she's going to not like them. Because she's a prick. Like,
I'm gonna have to interject and disagree with the whole, like, no one goes on the left, especially no one goes in without, like, violent intentions. They definitely do. Like, there's extreme forms of both sides. Obviously, a lot of people who are left-leaning have heard more about the right side because we don't like that, and everyone listens to what they hate for some ungodly reason. That's why Twitter's a problem. But, you know, people do go to things, and it does happen on the left. And I do think it's more common for the right, but that's because I've seen more stuff on the right. Like, I'm definitely biased in that point. But they do seem to have a lot more violent tendencies to me. But there are definitely people who are, like, left-leaning, and part of these left groups who will go to protests with the intent of them being violent. Like, it's not always instigated by the police.
I really disagree that. I mean, I'm organised on the left. I have many comrades who are organised on the left, and I don't know anyone who's ever gone to a peaceful protest and seen it kick off because of the protesters. Like I've never seen that personally, and
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to a single protest in my life, but I know it's something that does happen. And sometimes it's not like peaceful that turns violent; it's they go with the intent to be violent. Like that's the point. Like, I know it's probably more
I would
common
love
for
to see it,
police.
but I don't have any experience of that happening. And I've been to my fair few protests, and I have quite a few comrades who have been to many more than me, dating back to sort of the 70s. And I don't know of anyone who's ever met a left-wing agitator at a large-scale protest like that.
There was a couple in the big swing for BLM stuff in America. There were a good couple of people that went as part of leftist groups with the purpose of it being violent to protests. Like it does happen. I can understand why. Like you think it probably is much less common. I do think that as well. And I do agree that police instigate it a whole lot more with the countless examples of there being plainclothes police officers acting as protesters to instigate violence, which is obviously like abhorrent, but it's not completely impossible. Like I know you've never seen it, and that's fine, but it is very possible, and it has happened. Um, it's obviously more uncommon in your experience, and I don't have any experience to take from, but it definitely does happen. That's the only thing that I like vehemently disagree with that you say.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, as far my experience is that no one, well, my limited experience, I haven't found anyone that's wanted violence. But then I think, I mean, just thinking about the coup of the White House, there was like people who were really into that cause and believed in it and stuff, and then there were just a load of people who didn't really agree, who were just taking advantage of the situation as a means to be violent and stuff. And like, that's definitely a huge minority, and also like they're not people who support the cause, so they're not really protesters, because that doesn't really like
It's really
count.
difficult to use that as an example because I'm sure you've seen the video of there's like no one can decide. There's no unifying cause other than just like Trump. Like there was no like proper unifying thing that everyone agreed with because there was people like everyone's seen the dude who's like what are we going to do when we break in? Heads on pikes. And then there's other people who are like, we're not your enemy. We're trying to help you. And then people are like, oh, we hate the police. People are like, we're not going to hurt you. And then they kill the police officer. There was no it was just a mass riot. There was no message behind it other than just they were riled up by someone who is ridiculously, grossly irresponsible. And they just have a general feeling and message, but none of it is determined by a specific thing that they're there for.
Yeah, I think as well on the topic of the Capitol riot, I think there's with sort of the passing of this bill, and I'm gonna get quite left wing here. Please pause me if it gets a bit far. But I think there's a quote, can't remember who it's from, but it's basically the idea fascism is capitalism in decay. Basically, when capitalism is struggling quite a bit, which obviously we can see it is because we've had mass demonstrations pretty consistently from XR to BLM and now to what we've got going on today with Sisters Uncut. And the very idea that they're trying to pass this bill as something that is so inherently fascistic does actually show that it's people are changing stuff, and I think we can get quite a bit done with that change, sort of pushing forward to better world. So that's the thing. Obviously, they've delayed the bill. People are now saying, well, we do obviously need to be still out in the streets consistently to make sure that they just kill it. But then I think we need to go further past that. I think we do need to be actually pushing for some significant social change that does sort of undo the evils of capitalism, because when we see all of these causes, again, they are caused by capitalism. It's very fundamental that this capitalism is not compatible with climate sustainability. It needs racism to scapegoat and divide the working class, and it needs sexism to maintain the privatized sphere of reproduction. There's a lot of issues here that are all boiling down to one thing, and that one thing, as capitalism, is clearly going quite badly for a lot of people at the top.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in right now and say I think what the people at the top fear really more than anything is actual unification, is too many people actually coming together and agreeing on a certain cause. That's why they love to divide people and sort of put them into groups, and they sort of encourage that sort of mentality. And it's like when people were talking about who's at the protest, there's one group there that really are unified and are with the cause, and there's another that are trying to sort of sabotage it and steer in the wrong way. So I think it's sort of about misinformation and just trying to create all these different narratives, all these different perspectives, sort of opinions on these things to pit people against each other, especially with regards to politics, left wing versus right wing, and that whole mentality. And people at different ends of the political spectrum, they have different ways of thinking, they have different ways of living their life, different behaviors, different opinions about sort of wealth and that sort of, it's hard to unify people if they are sort of different in their psychology as well, because of their sort of different life experiences, different opinions, different, and it all sort of boils down to where they put themselves along that spectrum, that political spectrum. That really is sort of the main thing that does divide people, I guess, and stop that unification of those who are. Because, when you look at it, sort of the real divide is between the elite and everyone else, and wherever you draw that line, along the pyramid.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with the extent of the issue and that kind of thing. Because the whole the idea of effectively banning protests, as far as just going on one specific clause, I'm talking about clause 59, with the new public nuisance offence, with the possible threat of 10 years max sentence, and that depending on a very uncertain term, which is how much it affects the people nearby, kind of thing.
Who determines that how much it affects the people nearby? The people nearby or the police?
Well, that's actually a very good question, because there's a really important distinction with that which they haven't like brought up. So as far as the court aspect of it, it's probably going to go to the magistrates first, which means one single judge will determine that, and then if you want to appeal that, then it goes to a different court which has a jury in it, which is a bit more of a diverse range of opinions kind of thing. But as far as on the ground in a protest, they don't like. There's not a policeman like doing a survey of everyone who's nearby, asking how they're feeling kind of thing. They'll just do it. They'll detain you if they think that that's a possibility, and then only afterwards you get the possibility of using a defense of a reasonable excuse or arguing successfully that the public weren't actually affected like that. So basically, it doesn't matter really, in fact, whether or not the public were affected, because the police are just going to default to assuming that they are, and then only later, after they destroyed the whole protest on the authority of this new clause, are they going to actually decide that it wasn't, but that's like after the process is already done. So it's like shit as far as actually achieving a protest. While
Yeah, it's definitely like seems as more of a means to just stop protesting than it is to de-escalate or do anything, which is, I'm sure, very obvious to everyone. But yeah, no, that just seems kind of dumb. Like, especially the wording, because it's just unless you're like the person being disturbed, you can't be like, oh yeah, you're disturbing me, or like you were a disturbance. And it's like you weren't there. Like how we the public is the one that determines them being a disturbance, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But I'm also small brain and don't know law things, so it's probably a similar thing that you can already point towards and be like, ah, yes, but this. But I am a fool, so I do not know.
yeah. I found what the actual wording was. It's causing serious harm to the public or obstructing the public or a section of the public in the exercise or enjoyment of rights enjoyed by the public. So like driving my car across a road, so that's how they can criminalise roadblocks and stuff like that. So it's basically just anything that the public enjoy doing anywhere is the kind of thing that would come under the new public nuisance offence. But anyway, as far as the impact of that's a possible 10-year max sentence. If the bill got through, how would we possibly defend, like what would we do? And like the situation with the police right now is that it's already kind of dodgy to protest, but if that got through and loads of people would actually not want to protest, how could that get fixed?
What? Kite, isn't I was under the impression that this was just a move from common law to statutory. How do you say it? Statutory law, meaning that it's just changed from common law to statutory law, meaning they could already have done this, but now it's in codified law. I
mean it's codified now in statute. I think the main difference now that it's codified is that they've got a codified official max sentence, which is what's spooking everyone. Like there already was a common law nuisance offence, but it's the 10 years sentence, which is the like big thing that people are spooked about.
What was the sentence? Do you know what the sentencing was before in common law? Because common law is like set by precedent, isn't it? Yeah. I
mean, yeah.
Because if it was similar lengths before, then it seems reasonable. The 10-year thing.
Yeah, I understand, and like it's only going to be used in the extreme cases, the 10-year max sentence. I'm just having a look now because that would be useful to find out if anyone else can find it. But
it's very easy to see the numbers and be like, oh no, but I haven't looked into it, so I can't say.
The public nuisance thing, I thought that was less to do with protesting than that was a separate part of the bill, the protesting bit. Because isn't public nuisance you can't just use on like a single occasion when someone's protesting. I'm very unaware of what a public nuisance actually is in law, as you can probably tell. But I don't believe in what I read that they can use it in a protest like that.
I don't know. I think the vaguety of it helps to just be as more of a blanket term. So it's like, yeah, you're being a nuisance.
Well,
I
I
can call
mean,
myself a
you say
nuisance
it's
when I
vague,
walk,
but it
that's
probably,
good.
if it's now in statutory law, it probably isn't vague because that's how laws work, because they've already defined it.
I mean, literally, I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. That there isn't in the unamended bill as it is, and I can't remember what the common law version was. The what I read out is literally what they have to classify you as doing. It's causing serious harm to the public, or obstructing the public, or a section of the public in the exercise or enjoyment of things that they can enjoy. That the public at large can enjoy. So that's not specific to a protest. That's like it's anything you could do in the street, but also that kind of thing happens a lot in protests, if you see what I mean.
Well, I mean, for the one part that I haven't had mentioned, which I think is probably the biggest thing that I'm worried about, is the noise level, which causes severe disruption, which is defined by the Home Secretary whenever she wants. That's by far the stupidest thing I've ever heard. So the Home Secretary could just claim that it's severely disrupting people whenever she wants for whatever protest, for whatever reason, and it just seems ridiculous that would ever be passed in law.
That's what seems sucks, as they say.
Yeah, I mean I can't remember exactly what version of like delegated power they were talking about that authority like coming from, but the gist of it was that like there was very minimal parliamentary scrutiny as far as that. I don't think people would be too happy with it if there was like, I mean, if it was just a general act amending this act, it's coming under a bit of parliamentary scrutiny, but like, is that even good anyway as far as making an impact on bills and stuff, given that the bill is quite likely to get through as it is, kind of thing.
I think as well, when you like, obviously it's all down to the government, and you saw police trampling on basically women that were talking about their experiences with sexual assault at the Sarah Everard vigil, and then yesterday had literal Nazis marching through Hyde Park, making Hitler salutes and throwing them at the police, which didn't receive the same amount of force as people did at the Sarah Everard vigil. It is very clear where the government's sort of sympathies lie with this sort of thing. What are they going to let go ahead? Because they're not going to let protests go ahead if they're slightly challenging towards the government, and they are going to let them through if they're Nazis. Clearly, is what we've seen, and I think that's a pretty common precedent to set. When you look at you go to a protest, for example, if you've got a fascist counter demo, the police always protect them, and this is sort of just from experience. One of my comrades has a story about how they had a fascist counter demo in London, and the police basically made them a special section where the fash could sort of say, and it was in a fucking Weatherspoons. So the counter demonstrators were throwing shit at all of the protesters, going into the pub for a pint and a piss, going back out and then throwing more shit at the protesters, and the police were fine about it. Like we can see where the state lies with regards to the sympathy for these things. So anything that's gonna challenge the state, be it XR, be it whatever, like they're not going to get the same sympathies that the far right have already been given.
I think there's definitely a large amount of bias because I've seen that stuff happen as well, but I've also seen it happen the other way around. So like, I do agree, but I can also observe there is definitely a large amount of bias in just like what you've seen, because it does go both ways.
I cannot believe that the government are Nazi sympathizers or like that far right. I can see there be a bit of right bias, but like
Yeah.
I
don't
cannot.
I don't think it's Nazi sympathizers either, but I definitely do think.
Guys, I'll literally send you the videos from yesterday of the police watching as people did Hitler salutes and chanted anti-Semitic chants. Like,
oh, I've seen that. I've seen that happening already. Like I've seen them like basically like guarding people who are saying horrific stuff like that. But I don't think that action comes from like the top or whatever.
Well, I mean, do you know Lindsay German?
Oh.
So she is the chair of Stop the War. and Stop the War was, I think, still is the largest demonstration that the UK has ever seen. So someone that is pretty
Mate, they never listened to that. They never listened to that protest. They didn't give a shit. They just went ahead.
I know. It was still
determined. Because you know why? Because the US told them they didn't have a choice, man. Tony Blair, like.
No, I know. That's sort of regardless to my point though. Lindsay German is someone that is extremely well affiliated with organising large scale demonstrations within London, for example, yeah. And she tweeted something on the night when the police obviously went into Clapham Common and fucked everyone up basically. And what her tweet was: the Met Police, as much as they are dickheads, they are quite in tune to what is and what isn't public opinion. And obviously going in and beating up loads of women isn't the best thing for public opinion. And she said they are completely in tune, that they would have known that Crest of the Dick would have never made that call. She would say, I guarantee you that was the words of the Home Secretary to crush that vigil. Like, and that's not from me, that's from Lindsay German, who has had 20 years of experience organising demonstrations within London. I think it's just something to think about, like, where does the state's sympathy lie? Clearly not with sexual assault victims, not with climate strikers, not with Black Lives Matter protesters, not with sort of anti-racism as a concept. It lies with people that aren't going to challenge their power. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'd have to get more information to.
Yeah, no, I'll drop the tweets for any of these if I'm sort of referencing it, if you guys want.
I'm going to take Conway's approach, take more of a backseat on this one, much to, I'm sure, both of your surprise.
Yeah, definitely send them at some point, and I'll put them in the
description kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I'll have to get them together because there's been quite a lot on Twitter over the past few days.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Just one more thing about this protesty thing before we switch it up to a different kind of perspective. Like, as far as the Nazi people doing, I haven't seen the video, what they were doing, but all the stuff that they were doing, that's clearly like terrible, and I think a lot of people would agree that that's like too far. I mean, you could hopefully define it as in non cause based language, as in inciting hatred could be a kind of thing that you'd say is too far, kind of thing.
Did they commit any violence, or was it all just like hate speech? Was it verbal? Just the remarks they were saying. I'm just impressed by the police response to that compared to the other protesters. Yeah. I just wonder how many there were of them, etc.
There was quite a few. They took the majority of Oxford Street, which I don't know how well affiliated you guys are with London, but that's quite a stretch. And it did end up with basically violence towards the police and anyone that sort of was challenging them. Obviously, they weren't like killing people or anything, but like throwing bottles and stuff like that is still pretty grim stuff. And there was also like active hate speech directed towards people as well.
Was there like conflicts between like the left wing and right wing protesters though?
Oh no, there was no counter demonstration from the left yesterday actually, because no one really called it until the day.
So they didn't really have anything against that. Yeah.
The left didn't mobilise it in London yesterday. I mean, we had a bit of shit in Manchester yesterday because the Sisters Uncut demo happened to overlap with a large. It was technically a COVID denier demonstration, but they'd framed it as reclaiming England. So you're going to see the sort of demographic that they're going to get towards that. And a few of my
stickers about that.
What's that? Sorry.
I've seen loads of stickers people put up saying that it's like reclaiming England. A group of people who have like COVID as a fraud and stuff like that.
Yeah, a few of my comrades sort of got really quite threatened by some of them because they tried to take a sticker down and then they went to go to the Arndale to go to the toilet, and all of that, like five. Bearing in mind, when I say my comrades, this is literally like young women of like 5'6", and they were followed into the Arndale by about 5'6" large men who were like threatening them as they went in. So there's still that aggression, but there wasn't a counter demonstration in London, so there was no like widespread clash between anti-fascists and fascists. It was just between like the police and any passing sort of fascist targeted groups, be they minorities, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, the situation as far as the bill is that if the bill goes ahead, the classification of a protest which goes too far is shit, and it's way too minimalistic to actually make any significant impactful protests a possibility. So we could do with some classification of what is an okay protest. Do we think that the original pre-bill consensus on how police work is okay, or I'm guessing people would want a lot less powers? I don't know if people, because there is a point where some intervention needs to happen as far as when it gets to a certain point, but who does the intervention and at what point, if you have any ideas?
It's usually just whenever public safety is threatened, and that's like the police's responsibility. Like, I think obviously they're entirely necessary for maintaining public safety. So when it becomes like a threat to that, that's when people have to step in. It's just the difficulty is classifying when and what determines that, because stopping a few buses, that's not necessarily a threat to public safety, but you could also argue that it is. And then immediately it becomes ridiculously hard because you have to get the balance of people who want to have the freedom to do, like, freedom of speech, freedom of demonstration, all that stuff. But then there's a point where if it's too much, then too much disruption is dangerous to people. But if it's not enough, then people will be like, you're limiting like human rights and whatever. So I can't say, because I am big dummy, and also that is a very, 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 very delicate topic for me to just have the answer to. I think if I did have the answer to, I'd probably have a job in like the government, just like public affairs or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't really have anything to say. I think taking more power away from people in the current system that we have, or giving the police more power, I think is not the right way to go, especially when it's already been pre-established that there are problems in the institutions. So if those problems were non-existent, then I would probably be more fine with police having more power because it would ensure more public safety. Whereas since they do have a lot of issues in them, it's just going to make those issues even worse, like, the institutionalized racism and sexism and all that stuff that's already been mentioned. So yeah, that's my hot take.
Yeah. I see. I mean, the thing that I'm asking is like the whole thing that Parliament's supposed to do with like 600 different MPs. They're supposed to say different
Sadly,
arguments about
I don't have the mental capacity of 600 different MPs.
Fair enough. I mean, if anyone doesn't have anything else about that, then that's cool, and we can switch it up. But it's quite an interesting opportunity.
I have said my piece.
No, I mean, I think protests are inherently disruptive. Otherwise, they wouldn't get anything done. I don't think that. I think the state here are clearly just weaponizing what they're going to let disrupt things and what they're not going to let disrupt things. Because let's face it, the protests that I think most people here are going to are the ones that the state aren't a massive fan of, be they sort of climate justice, etc. And therefore, any power that we're giving over to the state, we don't want to be giving, really. It's not policing, then it's pretty shit, to be honest. And I don't think that the bill is the be all and end all of this. I don't think we can kill the bill and they'll be like, that's it, the police are fine now, because the bill hasn't passed. And I saw someone get assaulted by the police yesterday in Manchester. So there's clearly still a massive issue with how they police. And I think there needs to be some significant reform into that. Obviously, I haven't got all of the answers, but I would very much prefer that to some more intelligent people than myself, who have got some fantastic ideas around sort of community policing and stuff like that. Specifically, abolitionist texts do tend to have some really, really insightful parts that I can't articulate within the 25 odd minutes that we're looking at. But they have got some fantastic sort of solutions to this sort of thing that doesn't require a state monopoly on violence.
Yeah. It's just like there's like too many things to talk about, but just one of them.
One other thing is that the coronavirus and the whole issue around the pandemic, it makes it sort of so easy to clamp down on protests for any reason, and sort of, you know, forces them down the route of not really questioning anything, because if they do, then obviously that's sort of what leads to sort of the outrage and sort of trying to hold people accountable, and that fuel sort of, you know, perpetuates and propagates into that protest state. And I think really it's difficult really ethically to support like a protest if it's really so many people at the moment in the current state. I'm just wondering what your guys' opinions are on that, in terms of, you know, like a huge protest with loads of people. I mean, some are wearing masks, some not, maybe. Do you think that's, you know, fine really in the current where we're at and with the current situation?
Nah,
Or do you
I don't think big gatherings just no. Like, I understand, like
So in terms of numbers of people, what would you guys call an acceptable protest?
I think the only acceptable protests are the ones that like are within the guidelines decided by the government. So like, you know, everyone's wearing a mask, everyone's like a meter apart outside, that sort of thing. I know that like just is unfeasible.
It's not plausible though. Yeah, 1 meter.
Yeah, like, I know it's implausible, but like,
you know,
if what was happening would only affect like the people who are going out. So like, if you got the virus, it didn't spread. It just like, if you got it, then you have it and you can't give it to other people. Then it will be fine, because you're going out and you're risking your own life. However, in going out, you're risking other people's lives who don't necessarily want to or are able to. So the moment that it like, you know, affects other people other than yourself, then you don't have the right to make that decision to endanger other people's lives. I don't think so. Like, I think it is. I understand. Like, it also makes it like really easy. Which
it's
is part
hard
of
rhetoric, isn't it? That, you know, like about saving lives by not exercising your political opinion in a more sort of active way, as opposed to just virtually via social media, actually physically going and doing that.
Yeah, I understand it. It's a really, really difficult balance, because it's very easy to take power away from people in the current situation because you can do it under the guise of public safety. But I think like
There definitely is an element of that, and massive corruption with the government as well, wasting billions of taxpayers' money like on some failed test and trace scheme. Where's the, you know, and that's where's the outrage from the taxpayer about that? It's their money that's being like, you know.
Yeah. How's that corruption? That was ineptitude. Ineptitude was surely.
yeah, I think that was more ineptitude than corruption.
No, I mean, they were all like Matt Hancock's mates. Like they knew people that they were giving. I don't think it's ineptitude to give a PPE contract to someone that was previously making sweets. I do think it is corruption. I completely agree there. On the topic of protesting under COVID as well, I mean, when you look at Black Lives Matter over the summer, that didn't lead to a spike in COVID cases. There's very little evidence to suggest.
Not in here though. In America though, there was a massive wave after that, wasn't there?
That's
huge.
But there's very little evidence to suggest that is specifically due to that. There's basically no scientific grounding that transmission outside is even comparable to transmission inside. I mean, like when I've been demonstrating this entire term, and I got COVID, literally in my uni hall. Like, I think there's much bigger things. I think if we sat down and said we can't be demonstrating at the moment, we'd have a lot of fucked up shit that has been put through by this government. I mean, even under the pandemic, we've had the Spike Ops bill, we've had all of that corruption, which I think rightly should have had much more like demonstrative backlash. And now we've had this. I think there's much more important things to, because if we don't kick off about it, yeah, potentially some people will have had COVID. But when I was there yesterday, most people were spread out. Everyone was wearing a mask. The only people that weren't wearing masks were the police. Like, that's the sort of thing that we're looking at here. And again, there is very
hypocrisy there. It's crazy. Yeah,
there is very little scientific evidence to suggest that outside transmission is a thing. Like London, again, the Black Lives Matter protests were arguably less socially distanced than the ones that we've had sort of since like September onwards, and there was no spike in London after those or any other major city. They didn't lead to an increased COVID thing. What did lead to an increased COVID thing was ineptitude, such as stuff like Eat Out to Help Out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I haven't looked at any of the science behind it. I just know that the more people that are outside, the more people that are interacting, the more like opportunities that there is to spread, and lessening that amount is obviously going to lessen the impact of the pandemic. So I'm of the mind that like just reducing any and all like interaction, just like that's a good thing right now because then less people are going to fucking die. But I can also understand not having any visible demonstration does impact a lot of social and public change. But I think in terms of people are dying right now, I don't know. There's no balance that you can get. Like in my opinion, like you just can't have this happening. There are alternative ways to protest that are like much less effective, but you can still do it. You can still protest. It's not like you can't say anything. It's just less effective, and I think the less effective protesting is worth it for shielding and protecting people who are terrified of this, who are immunocompromised, people who haven't been able to leave their house in literally a year because if they did, they would have just like died. I think it's a worth trade-off because not everyone has the luxury of going outside to do it without worrying about if they get the virus, they'll probably be fine because they're healthy or whatever, however they think, even though statistically they might not be.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, the scientific evidence is that it's vastly reduced outside, but you can still transmit outside. So it's like it still is a problem, and I don't think it's the government trying to take away rights of protest. I do believe they're following the science as well. Well, they are sometimes. In this case, I think they are. And I don't think it's very long before you can again. And yeah, I think everyone should just follow the guidelines.
Like the only time I've really gone outside when there's been the only time I've really basically broken the guidelines has been once, and that was like a couple of weeks ago because I felt absolutely awful because I hadn't gone outside in the past like year solid because I've just been like inside the whole time. So it's kind of, for me personally, a little bit frustrating when there's people who have been going outside, and basically like doing whatever the fuck they want, and then they're annoyed that they can't go outside anymore when they've been doing it anyways. I'm not saying I'm not directing that towards either of you either. Don't worry about that. It's just I can understand people who who are immunocompromised, who are much more frustrated than me because I am able to go outside. Like I'm as at risk as everyone else, but I just haven't. So I can understand why people would be pissed. Where people like me have just been pissing about going outside when obviously I haven't, but I can understand the frustration. It just kind of feels like a massive fuck you to them.
I mean, my sister is immunocompromised. My sister is someone that should be shielding technically. And when I was on the Sisters Uncut demonstration yesterday, I'm a man. I'm 6'6". The risk of me being assaulted like in that manner is very minimal compared to what women face. I'm not doing that for myself. I'm doing that for people like my sister, who again is immunocompromised. She fully told me that she was proud of me for going out. And like, yeah, fair enough. Probably, it breaks the COVID guidelines, 100%. But what's even worse is people getting murdered, sexually assaulted, raped, and fucked over by the thing that has gone on before the pandemic, will likely to continue after the pandemic if we don't do anything about it. But I think there's, as much as it is, again, there is very minimal evidence that transmission is outdoors transmission is rare. Every single scientific source is saying that it's inside transmission that is driving up the cases. Once again, I will point back to Black Lives Matter in the summer in London. There was no spike after all of those demonstrations. And I know people that went to all three of them that were like consistently there. And again, they weren't that well socially distanced. No rising cases. There's bigger problems than this. I think, yeah, fair enough. Get pissed off at people going to parties. That's really reasonable. That's fucking stupid. Demonstrating outside is 100% a necessity if you can go. If you're immunocompromised, 100%. If you don't feel safe going because of COVID or police violence, 100%, that's absolutely fine. But if you feel that you can, and you feel that if you feel passionately about the cause, I think you do need to be demonstrating, really, and that's that's people's personal choice. But I think to say people going out and protesting are breaking COVID regulations chucks people in a barrel with two very different things there, personally.
That's fair. Yeah, no, I've already made my point. I already disagree, so fair enough.
I don't really see much actual advertising of the protests and sort of trying that kind of drive and encouragement to get sort of wider group of people sort of on board with that idea that would help, I guess, these causes. I guess there's an issue there with communication of the protests.
Not know. I'm not in any protest circles, so I can't say anything really.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on. I mean, the perspective of someone who hasn't been to a protest, it's difficult to appreciate, sort of to understand the feeling of actually being there.
Yeah, no, I know. Going to a protest is definitely something that I would like to do, and will likely do at some point in the future. But right now, no.
Ethan, I thought you went to the XR thing in
No,
Shrewsbury.
I didn't go to that one.
You didn't go any of them?
No, I was in
Yeah.
college. I had to go to lessons.
Weird child. Oh, so did I, but I went.
Well, I was really fucking struggling in college. Like, I needed to keep up, otherwise I was going to fail, and I would have failed if we had to do exams. Because thank God we didn't have to do exams. But also I do not like big crowds. Like, I know I want to go to a protest, but I absolutely hate the environment of a protest. But I still want to go to one, if you understand. But yeah, no, I haven't been to one.
Okay. Yeah, I get what everyone means, and it's tricky, and it's whether or not we need to strike a balance, or whether it's not a balance that's needed. Do we think that, just as far as, because like, if everyone had to wear masks and stuff, and that's what the role of some facilitator was, to like ensure that people were wearing masks and stuff, to like, because that's like a thing that if everyone's wearing masks, you can still do a pretty impactful protest with a lot of people, but it dramatically reduces transmission rates and stuff. Is there any place for some kind of thing like that, which asks a facilitator to do something like that, or where it doesn't necessarily impact on the effectiveness of a protest, or is there no place for that at all, and it should just be people do what they want to do?
It's another thing that's ideal but unfeasible. If you just look at the state of the world in general, there's always people who will wear masks wrong, who will refuse to wear masks, who will put a mask on and immediately take it off. It's idealistic that they'd have people that are like responsible for making sure, like, everyone's wearing a mask who's in the protest area or whatever, and it's part of like an affiliated event with people whose job it is to do that, who have like volunteered to do that. That would be great. And like, if that happened all of the time, then I still would not want them to happen, but I would be more lenient on it because they're taking every single precaution. But again, that's like what I said, everyone's wearing a mask, everyone's like reasonably distanced. That's just never going to happen. But if it did, then my opinion might change, but it's not feasible, sadly. Because, I mean, if you can't do that inside with security guards in a small place, guaranteed, then you can't do that outside in a much larger with a much larger gathering of typically emotionally charged people who feel passionate about what they're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. I see. Yeah, it's tricky.
It is indeed. Which is why I just think it's best to not, whilst this is all happening, but obviously that's damaging, so who knows?
Yeah. It's so tricky, like prying apart legitimate beliefs that certain like the government's targeting certain causes that they disagree with more, kind of thing. It's super easy to think that because of the stuff that they're doing. and especially with.
I mean, Priti Patel has actively said it. She was like, she's literally described Black Lives Matter as horrendous. Like, I don't think it's too much of a jump to go when she pushes through a massive bill criminalizing protest after she's called, I can't remember what she referred to Extinction Rebellion's Summer Rebellion as, but then referred to Black Lives Matter as horrendous. I really think it's quite reasonable to suggest that she's going for the protest that she's just slagged off, really. And then when we see that they don't care about protests like the ones when they're anti-vaxxers and neo-Nazis, but they do care about anything that is XR and Black Lives Matter and left-wing and etc. I think it's really reasonable to see exactly what type of protests are being targeted here by this bill.
Okay. I just can't believe that they don't care about anti-vaxxers and far right. I don't believe that without evidence.
That's understandable. Like I'm more inclined to agree, obviously, because you know I'm like more on that side than you are, Tommy. But like, I do feel like I'd like to think that it's either a lack of awareness of that happening, or it's like their consumption of biased media that leads them to have these biased opinions, not just like they actively agree with neo-Nazis. I think they just don't realize that it's a problem. At least that's idealistic thinking, maybe, but I don't really know anything about like I really don't know shit about a government, being honest. I don't know anything about politicians or the government. I just have opinions on things that people talk about.
I mean, I know they're not the smartest of people in the world, but what, the entirety of Oxford Street being taken by people waving Union Jacks and throwing Hitler salutes? You have to be pretty fucking inept to not realise that that's a thing.
You are not immune to propaganda. That is like the only thing I can say. It doesn't matter how smart you are always able to be radicalized.
Well, I mean, I wasn't radicalised by propaganda. I was radicalised by real things that are happening in the world.
Yeah, and people who think differently think the same. I'm not saying that you have been. I'm just saying that it doesn't matter. Like, intelligence has no bearing on radicalization. Like, you can't say that like they're stupid for believing this. They were like convinced of believing it. They can be really smart and still believe that. Like, whatever their reasons are. Some people do have just genuinely nasty reasons. Like, they're like, yeah, no, I hate X people just because I think they're worse than us, and that's just a horrible reason. But some people, like especially with anti-vax, a lot of the time it's just like a mix of fear and like they think they're doing what's best because they've been like manipulated into believing that. And I like to think that that's more of the majority, especially when it comes to anti-vaxxers. Is that it's a mix of fear and people who just genuinely have the wrong information than it is just being a neo-Nazi or something like that.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, like when you look at the sort of demographics that tend to believe conspiracy theories as a whole, when you break down a conspiracy theory, and they always target like the experience of working class people. Like you look to, for example, say like big anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, for example, when they go, oh, you know, the Jews are running the world, that it's their fault. That plays into the fact that someone has been fucked over, and yet that they shouldn't believe it. It's a very awful thing to believe, but the reason that has come about is due to the experiences that the reason that they're more susceptible to believe that is due to the experiences that they've had, which is, you know, being on the brunt end of a really shitty economic system that is fucking them over. And, you know, they shouldn't be believing it. They should be looking to the people like their boss and the capitalist class to see why they're being fucked over. But that's why conspiracy theories do tend to fall to it. So I don't think that I can see why that they have come to believe those sort of things, but I don't think that means we can just absolve them of all guilt for being blatantly anti-Semitic. And that's just one example. Obviously, this applies to most, if not all, conspiracy theories. You can break them down into some form of formula that will divert attention away from a certain thing towards another thing that will be less harmful for the ruling elite, basically.
Yeah, my point isn't that it absolves them of guilt. It's that they're not inherently malicious, bad people necessarily for being tricked into thinking that. It's just because like it's really easy when using a lot of the like politicized terms, I don't know, fucking big scary long words, it's really easy for people to think that, oh, you say that and then the connotations are immediately, this person is just terrible and inherently like awful.
Oh no, but I subscribe to the Marxist belief that no one is inherently anything. Like, people come out of their experiences and the conditions in which they live, and all it takes is for someone to actually take someone through a conspiracy theory, go, you've been told this is why it's wrong, this is what is actually going on, and then they might no longer believe it, and then they're much less of a cunt because they don't believe that extremely offensive thing that they did previously believe.
God, if it was only that easy.
Oh no, I know it's not that easy at all, but it happens to some people. Like, it's something that we should be doing. And if people, if you try and explain away someone's anti-Semitism and then they don't lose it, fuck them off. They're clearly a bad person, and there's no point in trying to save them from their own badness. We should just accept that they're bad.
Yeah, and then that leads into more points, which I can't be asked to bring up because we've got more stuff to talk about.
I mean, there's one more thing that I think is worth talking about as far as what we're talking about now. As far just like people getting indoctrinated and stuff. Okay. I'm pretty sure I've lost my train of thought. But oh no. Oh yeah. Actually, yeah. Sorry. So as far as just like civil disobedience and how these kind of things work, as far as people who are like super like indoctrinated into the things that we don't, like, one cause doesn't believe in. That's such a convoluted way of saying it. Like, alright, so Extinction Rebellion and climate change. There's like a small minority of climate deniers. It's not productive to try and convince them, even though they're a vocal minority, as far as getting a large amount of the population to be on side with climate change and get enough people on side to make an impact, which people think is about 3% of the population. As far as that, it doesn't really matter about the minority of climate change deniers. It's not like a productive avenue to explore as far as convincing people. We need to convince the people who are like sort of on edge about it and not sure, kind of thing. And so that's done by civil disobedience. The typical thing that people say about civil disobedience is that there's two options. It's either civil disobedience will keep happening, and more disruption happens which the government doesn't like, and they just get upset about it, and we just keep doing that over and over again and generate more media attention and stuff. Or the government gets sick and tired of all the disruption and caves to the demands to an extent, to reduce the disruption, kind of thing. But given the fact that a bill was proposed to ban protesting, what do we think as far as the likelihood of there being a third option, which is just that the government just clamps down on disruption, and like they have in this bill, made it so that there's a big threat to protest, kind of thing?
It doesn't ban protesting. I don't think you could say that.
I mean, just as far as like the media perception that you could get a 10-year prison sentence for doing this, or a £2,500 fine for not going along with a condition which you ought to have known, kind of thing, like really low standards but like big consequences. That's gonna stop a lot of people who are on edge about whether they should join in. That's gonna stop a lot of people who are like the most important people to get involved, and it kind of messes up the whole the government acts or disruption continues kind of thing, in my opinion. You see what I mean?
This was the question.
What? Yeah. Like, given that a bill like this has been proposed, does that kind of fuck up the whole way that civil disobedience can work in the UK? As in, is civil disobedience a viable approach, given that the government with a majority could just... I mean, they haven't explicitly banned protesting, but they could do something even greater than the bill with the Home Secretary's powers kind of thing, and make it so that any protesting comes under it. What happens then if effectively you can't
if
protest?
it is their intention to stamp down on Black Lives Matter and XR, and they do carry that through, I mean, we have places in history where this has been repeated. The suffragettes, I would name another, but I don't know, or just the civil rights movement generally. And I mean, it never stops these protests because people feel passionately about them because they're needed. So they will continue. People will, suffer the consequences of the new bill, but eventually, the population should win in the end.
Yeah. Like, it's really just like, you can look at it one way or the other. One way is that it'll just keep happening until it changes, or it won't. And then, surprise, now we live in a fascist country, and there's just no way to change it outside of, like, a coup or something. Like, it feels like it's a very, very, like, two-way street. It's like, if this passes, you either think it'll be shit for a bit and then it'll stop being shit because, people will vote new people in and, democracy will happen. Or you think that we're tending towards a fascist, like dictatorship, and the democracy won't happen, and that we're just fucked for a while. And then eventually, like, it will be overthrown, because I don't think anyone is ever going to think that there's going to be, like, an eternal fascist government happening in Britain.
Well, there definitely could be.
I mean, obviously it's possible, but that's too depressing to think about, so I'd much rather not think about that.
I mean, have you read 1984?
Shut the fuck up. God, that book was ruined for me by so many people. It's still a good book.
That's like why I'm spooked, because like that was the whole like good thing about civil disobedience, was that they don't have any option. It's either they act or they continue on with the disruption, which they don't like. But then, like, they have a majority in Parliament, and they're not really super accountable. Like, I'm still going to go ahead with civil disobedience as far as a way of social change and stuff, and I'm sure if the bill got through, or something stronger than the bill got through, people would still protest and stuff, because, like, filling up prisons is also bad for the government kind of thing, and they'd have to, like, stop kind of thing. But
we aren't America, so prisons aren't for profit.
I think I completely agree. I think civil disobedience will continue. It will just mean that it's much harder to do anything peacefully. If you gather a demonstration that would come out peacefully, and then you start arresting people who are there peacefully, it's not going to be peaceful for much longer. And it will just mean that all of the social change, because we do need social change is a necessary thing. And we've seen over the past few days where it is technically illegal for people to go to these protests, but they're still going because there's something that's really important that needs to be communicated. And those things aren't going to go away. So all that's going to happen is you're just going to have more and more disruption, whether it's illegal or whether it's not. It's still. I saw a really interesting tweet about it, and it basically compared it to the 90s, and it was like, they've criminalized clubbing a lot more, which is another thing that's come out of it's been happening over the years, but is going to come out of this as well. They're criminalizing clubs and they're criminalizing protests. So what we're going to see is we're going to see more raves illegally and more riots, which are obviously illegal, which is, whatever happens, but all it means is that, and this is the words of the tweet, they're not mine, it said, whatever happens, but all you can guarantee is that you and your mates will probably get nicked at some point. And that's all that's going to happen. These things will still go ahead. There will still be civil disobedience. There will still be demonstrations. There will still be everything that we've got at the moment, because people do need to do those things for their own moral consciousness. All that's going to happen is it's going to be a lot more dangerous for people to do it, and it's going to make the government a lot more unpopular.
Yeah, in that same vein, you can compare it to, like, the criminalization of stuff like weed. It's like everyone. I can guarantee everyone in here has either partaken in the smog or knows someone who has, because it's an incredibly common thing. It's obviously it's illegal, but it's ridiculously common and quite easy to get a hold of, especially depending on where you are. So, like, if it was legalized, then it would just become more regulated, and then it would become a lot safer. There would be strands that are more harmful that would come under regulation, and they would hopefully improve. So just by criminalizing it, I can see why it becoming more dangerous. I don't think it would, like, legalizing it and it coming under government regulations, that's not obviously applicable or as applicable to this. But I feel like it becoming a lot more safer would certainly improve, as well as maybe I think a lot of these issues, there's more fundamental issues which are like which kind of stand in the way of it. So it's like these changes, a lot of these ones that are like idealistic under the current government, a lot of those changes won't come to fruition solely because I think there is a lot of in England especially, like old boys stuff. There's a large class divide which is very prevalent in like in the government and things, and if that is something that were to be fixed, I feel like a lot of these problems would either fall into place or they would be feasible to fix, because it would less be like a private network of people who are in the top, and it would be more like actual people who are there, because that is a definite thing. We have like a grounded gentry sort of government, which has been a long-lasting problem in British politics and our culture in general.
I think I slightly disagree with you on that there. With regards to sort of like politicians, I think that when you think of democracy, I don't think democracy takes place every 5 years when you vote for some old white guy to represent you. And when you look at, say, Kamala Harris, for example, in America, obviously she's a black woman and she's the vice president. But what has she actually done for the average working black woman in America? Absolutely shit all. She's not done anything. And that democracy is not who we vote for, who we've got in power. Democracy is things that we're seeing at the moment when people are getting in the streets together to show solidarity and show what they actually think about a specific issue, and then pushing for something to be done about it. There's more democracy in Sisters Uncut gathering and getting the Labour Party to change their position than there is in electing the Labour Party, who have then changed their position, because they didn't change it on their own. They changed it because Sisters Uncut came out and demonstrated about it.
Yeah, I guess you could also bring in, when I said regulations to protesting, instead of just regulating protesting, essentially eliminating the need for protesting by having like these public things be regulated in such a way that it's basically just like a public like opinion poll on current things, and it would be like the same as a protest, but you would go there without having the fear of it turning violent, because it's just that you're being listened to.
Well, are you suggesting like direct democracy, Ethan?
Huh?
Are you saying like polling on decisions?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, I
referendum
know
on
completely
decisions.
that's very unfeasible, because that would be like every decision ever, and that's the whole point that we have a government.
Yeah.
Because then that's their job to decide on it, and
Well, what do you mean
just
then?
not going to work. But
I think I'd go one step further than you there, Ethan, with regards to that sort of democratic thing there. I think the real solution, because I don't agree with protests being regulated, I think that is very, very damaging precedent to set. I think what we should be doing is eliminating the thing that people are protesting about, be it climate, be it sort of ecocide, be it sexism, be it racism, be it like cuts, austerity, class divide. We shouldn't be going, let's do this through this system. We should be getting rid of the things that people are pissed off about, really.
yeah, but that's just kind of a given. Like, problems are there to be solved, and if it's a problem, solve it. Like, especially in terms of all the stuff you just listed. It's just the fact that that ain't simple, and we can't just solve the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't. If we could just solve the problem, we probably would have by now. But we can't, and that's why we need to have protest, because it's not going to be something that will be solved in in a short period of time, as much as it really desperately needs to be, like for climate change. Even though it's feasible, technically possible, but realistically, no. If you look at the past 50 odd years.
I mean, again, without getting too left wing, I think there is a reason that these problems haven't been solved. I don't think it's the fact that they're really particularly hard to solve. I think it's because there's
definitely like a mix of.
I think there's a certain group of people. Sorry, can you? I think there's a certain group of people that are controlling a lot of power, specifically the capitalist class, and it doesn't benefit them to stop these problems. You can't have capitalism and like sustainability, because capitalism is an economic system that requires constant growth. Therefore, sustainability out of the question. We have finite resources on this planet. Racism, fundamental tool of the capitalist class to divide the working class. Sexism, once again, needed to maintain sort of the privatized sphere of reproduction. And all of these things are fundamental to the people that are in power in this country. I don't think it's a matter of they're really, really hard to solve, because no one's inherently racist, no one's inherently sexist. I think people, the people at the top of society, again, the capitalist class, don't want to solve them because it doesn't benefit them. So what we should be doing is pushing for a society where those people aren't in the power that they have to subject all of us working people to those really, really shitty things.
In a communist utopia. Huzzah.
Huzzah.
Communism is vague. Yeah, no. I do think that a lot of the issues do stem from corporate greed and things like that. Sorry, Kai, keep going.
This is going to be the last thing that I think we're going to talk about, just because vibes are great right now, and we should end on great vibes. I was kind of half expecting this to be raised as an idea, and I can see why it hasn't been. But just as far as Extinction Rebellion thoughts on things, okay, so Extinction Rebellion doesn't agree with the way that democracy, in inverted commas, is happening, and the way that they're getting around the fact that it's technically a cause trying to force a government to do what it wants to do is by saying that it wants a citizens' assembly to decide things like this. And the point of a citizens' assembly is that it's basically the entire population voting on something, but it's the entire population who's informed and actually informed. Misinformation and stuff is not based on their decisions. It's they decide on the evidence that's provided in the citizens' assemblies and stuff. For the people who don't think that democracy is happening through protests and stuff, and I completely agree, protest is a great way of doing democracy. Would you stretch to say that a government that was bound by the decisions of a constructed citizens' assembly would meet the demand for democracy in a way that was not just based on people protesting on stuff? As in, TLDR, the short version, would a citizens' assembly be a long-term sustainable solution to get democracy where we don't really have it right now with proportional representation and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, proportional representation is usually good, and I know you can say too many chefs spoil the broth, but when it comes to decisions that affect millions of people, I think a couple hundred people still probably isn't even enough. It would lengthen the process of everything, but having more opinions on something, especially opinions that are representative of what it is essentially directly going to affect, that's never going to be a bad thing. Like, having more input on decisions, that's just more info, and more info, the only bad thing that comes with more info is that you have to process it, and that's easily doable. So it's never going to be a bad thing to have more people deciding on stuff that affects people. So I think, I don't know shit about anything legal, but citizens assembly sounds pretty pog to me when you're talking about it now, and the woman last time talked about it as well. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but yeah.
In principle, they seem pretty lit. Yeah, it's the same. So I wouldn't like them to be legally binding. I would have to see prior tests of citizens' assembly, because I don't really know much about them currently. Personally, I prefer a nationwide proportional representation within politics, like getting rid of first past the post and moving to actual proportional representation. But citizens' assembly, I would give them a go. Like a trial thing would be good.
Yeah. Obviously, there's always more ideal ways to solve the problem, like in what you said there. But in terms of what's probably feasible for us, it's probably the citizen stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Finley, given your position on the effectiveness of the democratic accountability mechanisms.
I think proportional representation is a very good start. I think it's quite good to do in the here and now. I don't think it's going to solve all of the problems in the world, I'll be honest. But I don't think a citizens' assembly would either. I think that there needs to be much more fundamental change to the way that we view democracy as a concept that doesn't revolve around constituencies voting for one person to represent them and going forth from there. I think that democracy needs to happen every day in our lives, and I don't think that, as much as proportional representation again is a really good start, first past the post is shit, for lack of a better word. But I think it's a good start. I don't think it's going to be the be all and end all, and there does need to be much more pushing towards more workplace democracy, especially. I think that the Thatcher's union busting in the 80s was one of the biggest attacks on democracy we've sort of ever seen in this country, because workplace democracy is so fundamental, and we should be pushing for more of that, not less. I think good start, but we need to have daily democracy in our everyday lives as opposed to voting for people, basically. I think we should be doing it ourselves as opposed to voting some probably old white man to go to a big building in the middle of London and represent his constituency in Bradford. Like, makes no sense to me personally.
That's fair enough. I understand. Yeah. Cool stuff. Lots of interesting ideas and perspectives. I'm gonna wait like 8 seconds. If anyone has anything else they'd like to add or a question that they'd like to bring up whilst we're all here, then go for it. But if you don't, and I'm going to start the countdown now, then we'll have to bring it to a close.
Does this mean it's time to say goodbye?
I think it does, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Oh no. Then I have nothing to say other than farewell.
You're welcome.
Cheers. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Indeed.
Nice
It's
Thank
one.
you,
always
everyone.
interesting to hear more opinions on stuff that aren't just my several voices in my head.
Get some help, Ethan.
I will, don't worry.
Kai, if there's any sources or anything like that that you need me to send you through,
Ooh.
I'll drop you in. The account on Twitter that I was sort of referencing with regards to the fascist demonstration in London yesterday is Anti-Fascist RC on Twitter, and they covered pretty much the whole thing. And then I've got a scientific article that I'll send you as well with regards to transmission outside as opposed to indoors.
Yes,
Cool.
please.
Brilliant.
All that shit will be in the description, boys.
Oh, I wanted to say
Oh, sorry. You can say it now if you want to, just so you can.
it's too
just
late.
skip
We
it.
already
Scratch
know
your
it's
itch.
going to be in the
Oh, okay.
description. Wait, can I
That's fair
say
enough.
like and subscribe?
Do it. Why not? Fuck it.
Do it or eat your children if you don't like and subscribe.
God.
There we go.
Exactly. You heard it here first, folks. But yeah,
Yeah,
good
God.
shit, everyone. Say bye to the people who were listening for a very long time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.